Okay, so welcome back sa ating channel. Today, we are going to be discussing a little bit of the current issue right now that I think tayo sa criminology profession should also be talking about since um, this actually involves crime per se, and especially that there's a risk that our student could be also be involved on these matters. So it's actually our concern too. Okay, so my topic in today's video would be the the hazing law in our country, the hazing law in the Philippines. So alam naman po natin kung ano-ano yung mga nangyayari right now, and as far as I'm concerned, this actually calls upon us, sa ating profession, to talk about this thing also, so that our student could also be informed on the pertinent provision of our law and what thus the law uh, talks about on the very act of hazing. No? So before we proceed any further, I would like to just show you some data with regards to the hazing victims in our country. So I would just start maybe at around 2012. No? So there's 2012 case, meron tayong case before, the case of Marvin Reglos. No? So for those who know the background of that case, I think you're still familiar with that. Then 2014, no? The case of Gilio Servando. And then 2017, ito, very fresh pa sa ating isip, siguro the case of Mr. Horacio Castillo, retired. Then recently, di ba, may mga cases na tayo that was involved. The case of Mr. Dormitorio, the case of Mr. Baguio, and the very recent case of Mr. Salilig. So all of these individuals are actually victims of hazing. Actually, meron pang isa. I was not able to include it, yung name, but just very recent kasi before the morning, no, nung yesterday, um, it was already in the news, no? Pero hindi ko na siya naisali dito. Pero of course, no, nakikita kasi natin guys, the rampancy of hazing still despite the law that we have already at hand. Dalawa po yung batas natin na nag-cover ng hazing in our country. No? Pero meron pa rin mga rampant cases. So, I would not talk about the possible causation for this. So I would just want to discuss some of the pertinent provision of the anti-hazing law in our country, no? Just as a starter, kumbaga, on the matters on hazing. Okay? So, first, I think that we need to settle is hazing actually prohibited here in our country? No? Pinaparusahan ba yung case na hazing? Basically, pwede niya sabihin, sir, very obvious naman po yata yan. No? But we must understand that we have two law that governs the act of hazing, no? That either regulate or prohibit the very act of hazing. No? So, Republic Act 8049, no, yung ating old law prior to the new law that we have, the Republic Act 11053, does not actually prohibit the very act of hazing. Yung 8049, yung unang batas natin, does not actually prohibit the act of hazing. So, ano po yung ginagawa ng 8049? Actually guys, doon sa luma nating batas, ang ginawa ng batas na ito is that it regulates only the conduct of hazing. No? So, there is a very specific distinction. There's a very important distinction between the word prohibits and regulates. Kasi pag sinabi nating regulates, it means that it still allows but sets a guideline for the conduct of the so-called hazing. No? So hindi niya totally pinagbawal, kundi nagbigay lang siya guys ng guidelines or ng rules on how hazing should be done and what requirements must be accomplished prior to the conduct of hazing. Yan po si Republic Act 8049. So, siguro with the increasing cases, no, and of course by public sentiments na rin siguro, no, they amended the very provision of Republic Act 8049, no, which, no, nagkaroon na nga tayo ng bagong batas on hazing, which is the Republic Act 11053. So, ang ginawa ni 11053 actually is that it completely prohibit any form of hazing. Na? Kung maalala nyo guys, dito lumakas na naman yung sentimiento ng mga mamamayan na dapat pang pagtibayin or palakasin, no, or bigyan ng mas matalim na pangil, kumbaga yung batas natin with regards to hazing. So that is why under the new law that we have, yung existing law that we have today, Republic Act 11053, no, it now prohibits any form of hazing. Pinagbabawal na po siya. No? So the answer for this is, of course, hazing is prohibited. Bawal na po yan sa ating batas. So with that guys, ano nga ba kasi, no, yung hazing? What is hazing? Okay? So first is, let us discuss what is hazing under the old law that we have, the Republic Act 8049. Nagkaroon siya ng simple definition on the term hazing. Hazing, he defined under the old law as any initiation rite or practice as a prerequisite for admission into membership in a fraternity, sorority, or organization. So there are different, or there are important words that we should take note into the old definition of hazing. Number one, initiation rites. No? So we know naman siguro what are considered as initiation rites, such as for example, mga rituals or ceremonies na ginagawa usually ng mga different organization or different brotherhood or sisterhood. No? So, yun yung mga tinatawag nating initiation rites. Kasi marami naman pong mga form of initiation rites. No? Not all initiation rites are actually considered as hazing. No? Another important term that we should understand under the old definition of hazing is that it says here that if the initiation rite is a prerequisite, ibig sabihin po ng prerequisite is that it is a requirement. No? It is a requirement. Sabi ng ating lumang batas with regards to hazing, it's a prerequisite for admission into membership. So, ibig sabihin, no, any form of initiation or practice that are considered as a requirement, no, for the admission of one person or one aspirant in order for him to become a member of that organization, whether that is a fraternity, a sorority, or any organization as defined under this law, will be considered as hazing. No? So broad ang definition guys ng term na hazing under our old law. Okay? With the new law, no, sa ating bagong batas, nagkaroon tayo ng mas specific na definition on the term hazing. No? Kasi nga, as you can see, it now declares any form that constitute hazing as a prohibited act. No? So, isa yan sa binago ng ating bagong batas na kung saan define niya ng mas specific yung term na hazing. How did Republic Act 11053 defined the term hazing? So sabi niya is hazing refers to any act that results in physical or psychological suffering. Any act that results into physical or psychological suffering, harm, or injury, yun po is considered as hazing. This psychological and physical suffering, harm, or injury is inflicted to a recruit, neophyte, applicant, or a member as part of their so-called initiation. No? So, nandun pa rin guys yung term natin as prerequisite. If a person who wants or who aspire to become a member of a certain organization needs to undergo, that is physical or psychological suffering, harm, or injury, matatawag po natin yan as hazing. No? Remember guys, very specific. Physical or psychological suffering. No? Yung word na suffering, harm, or injury. Dapat it can be proven that actually these aspirants, no, aspiring members, applicants of a certain organization had undergone the so-called physical or psychological suffering, harm, or injury, no, as part of the so-called prerequisite prior to their uh, admission as member. So, if those circumstances exist, no, if those circumstances exist, that will be considered as hazing. No, it will be considered as hazing. Actually, no, if you're going to look into the law, nandun yung mga specific action that constitute the act of hazing, gaya ng pamamalo, no, pamamahiya, no, pag-force sa isang tao, no, na mag-take ng any substance or food, no, against that this action will constitute yung tinatawag nating physical or psychological suffering, harm, or injury, mako-constitute siya as hazing, no? So, yun yung kailangan i-establish natin. If we are required to undergo such initiation, no? Or such, initiation rites. If we feel, for example, that this initiation is causing us physical or psychological suffering, harm, or injury, matatawag na po natin yan na hazing. Therefore, it is actually prohibited. No? One of the specific statements that was added onto the old definition of the term hazing is actually yung paglagay dito ng tinatawag nating requirement for continuing membership. No? Requirement for continuing membership. So let's say for example, no? Kasi pwedeng dayain nila, no? Pwedeng hanapan nila ng butas yung batas natin on hazing at sabihin nila that during his admission, walang ni-require na any form of physical or psychological suffering. However, no, pwedeng ang gawin nila is that in order for you to continue, no, in order for you to continue becoming a member of this organization is that you need to undergo this specific initiation. Pwedeng yun ang gawin nila guys para malusutan kumbaga yung batas natin on hazing. So, naging maganda ang pag-define nila ng term na hazing kasi it also included yung if that is a requirement for continuing membership in a fraternity, sorority, or organization. So kahit halimbawa hindi siya naging requisite for you to become a member, no, of that organization, but it will become a requisite, no, for you to continue as a member or to keep like give you an authority to continue becoming a member of that organization, fraternity, or sorority, that still will be considered as hazing. Na hazing pa rin siya. Okay? So, may mga ganyang instances kasi na may mga organization, may companies that hindi naman admission, hindi naman siya as a requirement for admission. So, let's say for example, a certain company or certain organization, kasi ganito usually nangyayari, which is talagang uso, na-observe nating nangyayari siya sa mga organizations, sa mga let's say even companies, something like that, no? So let's say for example, that during your admission is hindi ka ni-require ng kahit ano bang, let's say, physical suffering or psychological suffering, no? Pero nung nandun ka na, member ka na, no, is parang pinipilit ka nila na, oh, you need to perform this in order for you to continue serving as a member, no? Para magpatuloy ka sa member ng ating organization, you need to perform this. Halimbawa, they will give you some task that is, let's say, psychologically abusing. Halimbawa, pagsuotin ka ng damit pang babae, lalaki ka. And you need to, like, for example, is kailangan mong mag-perform, no, in order for you to keep, no, becoming a member of this organization is you need to wear this specific type of clothes, no? Kung lalaki ka, pagsuotin ka ng pambabae, then pag sayaw-sayawin ka, something like that. Okay? If that is a requirement for your continuing membership to that organization, that can actually be considered as hazing, no? That can be still considered as hazing, no? They could not use the excuse that hindi naman siya as a requirement, no, for your admission. Yes, pero kasama na rin kasi sa batas natin sa hazing yung for continuing membership, no? So yun, for example, they would require you to perform such task, no, na medyo it can cause you psychological discomfort or psychological suffering, something like that. Well, you can actually claim that that is an act of hazing, and therefore that is a prohibited act, meaning any organization, sororities, or fraternities cannot actually force you in doing such thing, no, because that will constitute hazing, no? So magiging hazing siya, which is pinagbabawal. Again, remember, no? Hazing on the old law is defined broadly, no? Kaya nga naging ano lang yan naging regulated kasi broad naman talaga yung pagka-define sa kanya. Pero dito sa ating bagong batas, guys, which it was already defined specifically, therefore, no, there is already a clear distinction on what constitute hazing and what constitute a simple initiation that is not actually inviolative of our law on hazing. So naging specific na siya, madali na natin makita what constitute hazing at what constitute a legal initiation rights. Okay? So again, the hazing is now totally prohibited. Okay? There are rules in the conduct of hazing, but then again, now this is just for the purpose that I could explain that these rules no longer applies. Kasi marami pa rin tayong naririnig na kung saan is what they know about hazing is that you can still legalize, no, the performance or the conduct of hazing. No, actually, no, marami na tayong na-encounter na kung saan is ang alam pa rin kasi nila, guys, is that pwede pa rin maging legalize yung pagkandak ng hazing. Hindi po, no? On the old law, Republic Act 8049, actually, no, if you've only followed the following rules, no, the hazing would be considered as legal. No? Kasi sabi nga natin before, it is only regulated. Now, however, Republic Act 11053 now prohibits all forms of hazing. No? So kung mapapansin nyo dyan, nandiyan pa nakalagay yung mga requirements, like for example, initiation shall not exceed 3 days or before that, no? The conduct of hazing, no, bago kayo mag-conduct ng hazing is that meron dapat written notice submitted, no, to the school authorities prior or 7 days prior to the conduct of hazing. Yun yung lumang rule, no? Also, nandiyan din yung, for example, names of the person list involved and like there shall be no physical violence and these are the old rule, no? Old rule on in conducting hazing. But then again, I would like to point out that this rule no longer applies because hazing now, all forms of hazing now is actually prohibited by Republic Act 11053. These rules actually now applies to initiation rites, no? Yung mga rites or rituals conducted by organization or groups that does not constitute to hazing, no? Shall still before the performance of such, they still need to comply with this rule, no? So this rule are mere likely applied now for initiation, no? Pero pag hazing, if the act constitute to the if the ritual constitute hazing, then there is no way you could legalize that because the law is very strict, no? Sabi niya, all forms of hazing will now be prohibited. Okay? Now, interesting question that many of you might ask is, yung bang ginagawa ng PNP or AFP or any uniformed services, no, na reception rights? Okay, so I do believe you're all familiar with the term reception rights. So, alam niyo kung ano yung ibig natin sabihin. Would that constitute hazing? No? Would that constitute a hazing? So in our new law, no, nagkaroon na tayo actually ng very specific provision that answers that very question. Ang sabi ng ating batas is it does not constitute hazing. No, it's not. It's not a hazing. The reception rights performed by uniformed personnels, no, whether that's the PNP, AFP, BGMP, PFP, does not constitute hazing. Hindi siya nagko-constitute as hazing because it's actually approved, no? Inapprovehan po yan ng Department of National Defense, the Chief of Staff, no? The Chief PNP and so on. Because the purpose of that is actually naman for the organization to test or to determine the physical capability, mental capacity, psychological fitness of those future members, which is very important kasi they will be part of the so-called uniform services. Okay? So, hindi siya requirement. Hindi siya requirement for employment. Kasi remember, I was asking, I'm very thankful doon sa aking kaklase, si John Paul, Sir John Paul. I was asking, ano ba yung nauuna, oath-taking or reception? And according to him, nauuna ang oath-taking. So it means that you are already a part of the PNP once you take oath, no? You're already a part on the probationary status rather, no? On the probationary status in the PNP before the reception. Okay? So, you are already a part of the organization before yung reception, and undergoing reception is not actually a requirement for your continuing service. It's up to you. No, kung you cannot pass through the reception, maybe you would not also pass on the different trainings that they will be conducting. So it's up to you if you're going to continue or you're going to quit. No, you're going to back down, something like that. So, ganun lang naman yun. But nevertheless, it's not actually a requirement for employment. Hindi siya kinakailangan for you to be employed. Kasi nag-take out ka na, ibig sabihin, you are already a part of the organization. So, nevertheless, yung batas natin actually exclude, itong mga reception rights na ito na pinaperform ng PNP, AFP, or other uniformed services as an act that does not constitute to hazing. So, malinaw po tayo dun. Hindi po siya hazing. But for other organization, kasi for PNP and other uniformed services, they have a particular purpose, in doing that. They have a particular purpose in doing that. But for other organizations, for other, let's say, sororities, fraternities, and so on, I do not see the reason why they need to undergo such ritual, whether that's physical, mental, psychological. Are they going to be involved in defending our country like in the yung parang ginagawa ng ating mga kapulisan? Bakit? Sasalang ba sila sa gera? Sasalang ba sila sa pagprotekta sa ating bansa laban sa mga armadong kalaban? Something like that. So there's no particular reason or reasonable ground, for doing such thing, no? Yung mga pinapagawa nila. Like for example, yung mga pagpalo-palo, pamamahiya, something like that. There's no particular reason for that, no? That could justify that these different organization, fraternities or sororities are actually needing, no? And will justify bakit nila ginagawa yun, no? So if there's no justification, and our law could not all actually see some justification for that, no? Hindi ma-appreciate ng ating batas kung ano man ang justification kung bakit nila ginagawa yun. That's why they prohibit it, no? So I'm not in the position to call for this stoppage of such, no? Pero as we have stated, it is against the law. We have a law that says that is prohibited, then we must abide with what the law says. No? Kasi maraming mga napapahamak, no? May maraming mga napapahamak na mga kabataan, estudyante, no? Kahit na mga matatanda na, no? Na napapahamak dito sa tinatawag nating hazing. No? So, syempre sila lang naman, gusto lang naman nilang maging miyembro, ano? Maging miyembro, mapasali sa isang samahan na kanilang nire-respeto. That is why they want to join. No? Kaya nga sila gustong sumali sa organisasyon na yan because they admire, perhaps they admire and they respect such organization, and there's no need for them to suffer that much para lang maging miyembro sila. I mean, there could be other ways, no, on how we could welcome, no, yung mga aspiring members, no, without doing such cruel things or barbaric things to them, no. So, yan po yung ating discussion, a simple discussion on the status, on the hazing law of our country. And I do hope I was able to share some knowledge with the topic that I just discussed. That's it for today's video, guys. Thank you for listening. See you next time. Bye-bye.